Now we've got the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Thanks for coming back on.
Thanks for having me back.
So we've actually got a ton of transportation news and climate news. But first, let's touch on the impeachment inquiry that was just approved by House Republicans. How worried were you when you found out that Joe Biden committed the high crime of helping his son pay for a truck as a private citizen?
You know, it really is, it just defies logic. They've been at this for more than a year. They can't even decide what the supposed charges are. It's clearly a fishing expedition, but the thing that's really worrisome is there's a real opportunity cost to this. This is the same United States Congress that we urgently need to do things like reauthorize our FAA bill that's helping us keep air traffic controllers on the job. We need them to pass a Railway Safety Act that is going to make sure that something like what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, never happened again. We need them for a budget, just the absolute basics. And the fact that they have time for this and they don't have time for all of that calls into question what the priorities are for House Republicans.
They're making the argument themselves that the point of this Republican House conference majority is the dysfunction in and of itself. But clearly, the whole point of this effort here is to offer up the optics of corruption as far as Joe Biden is concerned. What's your message to Republicans out there, especially those who consume right-wing media, about the disinformation that they're being fed by these folks who are desperate to hurt Biden politically?
The bottom line is to look at the fact that this has not produced anything real. They are openly admitting that they are launching an investigation for the purpose of finding something that would justify an investigation, which they can't. And in the meantime, they are wasting time and money that is very much needed for Congress to deal with things that actually have to get done. And if you are a conservative, if you are a religious Fox News viewer, you are going to be hurt just as much as any Democrat or independent sitting at home watching this play out. You too will suffer if Congress can't even pass a budget or give us the resources to train the air traffic controllers who keep the system running or do any of the other things that we need Congress to do at a moment when there is enormous conflict and instability and pain in the Middle East, at a moment when there is democracy on the line in Ukraine. And at a moment when right here at home, we need to be investing more, not less, in keeping this country running. It hurts all of us when they waste time and money on these kinds of political partisan adventures.
And to your exact point, I believe it was Troy Nehls who came out when he was asked what the point of this whole thing was. He said Donald Trump. And it kind of is evocative, too, of how in 2015, I believe, it was Kevin McCarthy who came on Fox News and admitted that the point of the Benghazi Select Committee was to hurt Hillary Clinton. So this is a well-trod path for Republicans. They saw it work in 2016, and they obviously, saw the virtues of it and are trying the same thing now. Marjorie Taylor Greene had suggested this past weekend that Lindsey Graham should be primaried because he dared concede that there was no evidence to impeach Joe Biden. What's your response to Greene's comment?
Well, look, there's a certain segment of the extremist wing of the GOP where even telling the truth is a crime, where they'll come out against you for telling basic truths. But again, this keeps coming back for me to the question of what does any of this mean to somebody's daily life at home watching this stuff play out? And there's just no possible explanation for how any of this noise is going to make anybody sitting at home better off, especially when we have all the issues and problems that we do need to pay attention to and act on, that we are as an administration. I mean, for example, right now, Congress could stop, congressional Republicans could stop blocking a measure that would bring $35 a month insulin to every American. We've already done it for seniors. They're stopping us from doing it for all Americans. Congress could change that right now. That's just one example. They could renew a child tax credit and cut child poverty in half. We know that works because we did it. But then congressional Republicans pushed to allow that to expire. These are the kinds of things that would directly affect millions of Americans in concrete, measurable ways. And instead, they're indulging in this kind of nonsense at the behest of extreme members who I think most of the people elected in the House and Senate in a private, quiet, honest moment would tell you they know deep down this is nonsense.
Right. I know the inclination here is to mock Republicans who are advancing this whole sham effort, but the reality is that in the same way they pretended, to my earlier point, that Hillary's emails was the biggest national security threat in U.S. history, they're trying to do the same thing here. So what should Democrats do to rebut what will obviously be a major disinformation campaign moving forward?
Well, in addition to the pointing to the fact that so many of what they say or claim or insinuate is quickly and easily debunked, which is exactly why, for example, this investigation hasn't yielded any actual true actionable facts, it's getting back to the basics. I think what we need to do is have a split screen that shows the difference between what they're working on and what we're working on. We're fixing roads. They're looking for some excuse for an impeachment inquiry. We're building bridges. They're banning books. It's very clear the difference in priorities, and we're going to keep our focus on what makes people better off.
Perfectly put. All right, so Republican dysfunction aside, let's talk about some major tangible wins in your department. So first off, can you speak on the first federally funded EV charging stations that are finally going into service?
Yeah, we're really excited about this. This has been more than a year in the making, and it's all about making sure that there are chargers everywhere you need them. There's a lot of electric car chargers around the country that have been already put up by private companies and private industry, but not enough. The president's vision is we got to have 500,000 of these chargers around the country by the end of the year, and that's not by the end of the decade. And that's not going to happen without us making sure that they exist even in places where they're not yet profitable. And a good example is on a 50-mile stretch of road, you got to make sure there's going to be at least one charger there. The same way that if you get in a gas car on a road trip, there's going to be gas stations between where you started and where you need to get to. So the very first of these new chargers, federally supported with dollars from the infrastructure package, was installed in Ohio, closely followed by one in New York. There are hundreds and eventually thousands and thousands and thousands more to come. And this is going to make a huge difference for convenience and have a positive climate impact, because it's going to encourage more people to feel comfortable making that choice to go electric. And maybe the best thing of all, really stimulating a U.S. industry that's going to create a lot of jobs making and installing these chargers.
So this time next year, how many charging stations can we expect to see?
First we'll see hundreds more, then it'll go into the thousands, and we're going to need that. We've seen tens of thousands of public chargers added already since President Biden took office, publicly available chargers, but we need more where that came from. And again, it's all working toward that goal of 500,000 by the end of the decade.
Now, there's another EV milestone regarding the number of electric vehicles sold in the United States. Can you speak on that?
That's right. Yeah, more than 1 million sold, which is a new record. And it shows that every year there is more demand than the year before. The share of vehicles sold that are electric has tripled. There are going to be some ups and downs, as there are in every market, but the direction has been clear and unmistakable. Part of what we're focused on is making sure that they're more affordable. That's why the Inflation Reduction Act includes those tax credits for new and used EVs. If you qualify, it's not for the most expensive cars or for the wealthiest Americans, but for many vehicles and for most families, you can qualify to get a big savings on the upfront price, and then after that, you're saving on gas or diesel because it's cheaper to run a car on electric than it is on gas and diesel. So we're really excited about that. And again, the other thing that's really big here is jobs. I come from the industrial Midwest. I know how helpful it can be to have auto manufacturing in your region, and I know how terrible it can be if your region loses out. And that's what happened in my hometown of South Bend when Studebaker closed. We have got to make sure that the next generation of cars, which will largely be electric, are made in the U.S. Under President Trump, frankly, they allowed China to get the advantage on EVs. We're taking that advantage back to America for American workers and American consumers, doubling down on that work. And we're excited to see that continue to develop, especially because I've seen the factories and the jobs that's going to create.
Are there any projections on what the number of EVs sold in the U.S. next year would look like? Because I think it took like 15 years to get to 1 million. So when can we expect 2 million, for example?
The growth is going to be exponential. I don't have a projection for next year's sales, but I think we are going to continue to see that growth. And the goal that we've set is to have it be about 50-50 by the end of this decade. Now, I should acknowledge, we don't expect, and frankly wouldn't be ready for everybody to just go electric overnight. If everybody wanted an electric vehicle tomorrow, we don't have the grid for that yet. We're racing to build the grid to make sure the chargers are out there. So this is a process, but it is a swift process, and one that will unfold a lot more quickly than the original development of the internal combustion engine 120 years ago.
So another big win in the transportation sector is with HighSpeed Rail, and that's happening in my state, in California. What's happening on that front?
Yeah, this is big. I think so many Americans, especially if you've ever traveled to a country that has high-speed rail, and then come back and thought, well, why can't we have this? I mean, why can't the United States of America have rail service that's at least as good as what they can take for granted in, not only Japan or Germany, but England or Spain or Morocco? We should be able to have this too. And we're getting this done now with the dollars in President Biden's infrastructure plan. We just announced 2 major rounds of funding. One, $3 billion headed to California high-speed rail. Another $3 billion headed to a line that's going to run between Las Vegas and Southern California. They have a very ambitious timeline. If they meet their timeline, the developers of that project will be done in time for the LA Olympics in 2028. And I think that the sooner an American traveler experiences high-speed rail on American soil, the sooner people will say, we've got to do this nationwide, and there will be no going back.
So is there funding for more high-speed rail projects after this, or is this going to be the test case for what kind of infrastructure funding could deliver, and then and also the rationale to push for more in the future?
We think these 2 projects are going to really be the ones that launch America into a high-speed rail era. But we're funding planning in Texas for a route that would go between Dallas and Houston. There's another proposal in the Pacific Northwest. There are many other places that could qualify for future rounds of funding. Now, to be clear, we're also investing a lot of funding in what you might call regular speed rail, which is a great option if it serves your community and it's on time and reliable. That's been a real problem, partly because the infrastructure has not been in good shape. So when you see us making improvements along the Northeast Corridor, some of the investments we're making to Union Station in Chicago or other locations around the country, I mean, everywhere from Montana to Alaska, we're also just making sure that in general, America has the level of passenger rail that we ought to and not the one we inherited.
So let's finish off with this. There was also record-breaking airline news. Can you speak on what happened here?
So we have just announced a record penalty against Southwest Airlines. This all has to do with the meltdown that took place about a year ago. Going into Christmas, there was enormous upheaval. There was a winter storm. Every airline got hit by it, but most of them recovered. Southwest melted down. 2 million passengers were affected. 17,000 flights canceled. Hundreds of thousands of people delayed. As a consequence, over the last year, we've been looking over their shoulder at their refund and reimbursement process, making sure they take care of passengers, and conducting an investigation into how they violated consumer protection and customer service rules. And the bottom line is a $35 million cash penalty as part of a $140 million penalty package, the majority of which will go not in fine and fee dollars to the Treasury, but in dollars going back to passengers. $90 million in a fund that's being set up to provide vouchers and compensation for future delays, which I think will send a powerful signal, not just to Southwest, that they need to make sure this never happens again, but to the entire airline industry to take better care of your passengers. Otherwise, we will hold you accountable.
Do you have Christmas plans?
Yeah, I do. We'll be one of those Americans who's both driving and flying. Looking forward to. I got drawn for the responsibility of driving the dog back to Michigan, so that'll be a nice long road trip for us, and then spending a lot of time with family. How about you?
I'm heading out to New Jersey for a week for the Christmas holiday, and then just laying low for as long as I can, and trying to take advantage of hopefully nothing happening in politics. So we'll see what happens on that front. But with that said,
it's been quite a year, so I think America has earned a restful holiday.
Yeah, at least a few days. But famous last words. We'll see. With that said, Secretary Pete, thanks so much for taking the time.
You too. Thanks very much. Enjoy the holiday.